This episode of Now This Is Lit is brought to you by Audible. Check the link in the description to get your first Star Wars audiobook free. Everyone loves free things. Click that link. Do it. This show is also brought to you by our patrons. If you want to support the show in a different way, with just $1 a month, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/StarWarsLitPod. You can get a sticker. You can get access to an exclusive show that we do every month that's wild and chaotic and fun and something you can only get by becoming a member of the Patreon. There'll be so many more perks very, very soon. But for now, do you want a sticker? Do you want a sticker that has a Now This Is Lit logo? Because it's fantastic and I love them. But I also want to give them away because there's just a stack of stickers on my desk. So if you want one, $1 a month. Patreon.com/StarWarsLitPod. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. You're listening to Now This Is Lit, a podcast about Star Wars books, people who make them, and the readers who just can't get enough of them. I'm your host, Meg Dowell. I use she, her pronouns. And we're finally talking about The Eye of Darkness. It's been months. Normally what I like to do, or really, I should say what I set out to do when I started the show, was to schedule full spoiler book discussions 30 days, or basically a month, depending on when episodes fall, after the book comes out. And that has happened fewer times than I would like on the show. But you know what? Sometimes you just have to go with the way that things are. So I'm so happy to welcome Rick from Jam Transmissions onto the show this week to talk to me about another new High Republic book. Rick he's followed me for a long time, but is also a founding member, if you will, of my Patreon. First one to lend $1, literally. Now, it's been more than $1, but $1 a month. So happy that he's supporting the work that we're doing here on the show. And I thought, as a thank you, I would invite him onto the show to talk about a very fantastic book. I've been talking too much. Intros are supposed to be short. I hope you enjoy the conversation. There will be spoilers. Something that I've started doing recently, and by that I mean I think I've done it 1 or 2 times. When I have anyone on, regardless of whether or not they're a new guest or not, I want to talk about what we're currently reading. What Star Wars are we currently reading? So tell me, either what you're currently reading that's Star Wars or the most recent thing that you've read.
Okay, so being lucky enough to be on the reviewer list for Star Wars, I am currently halfway through The Living Force by John Jackson Miller. I just passed the halfway point yesterday, and I know you've started it. I don't know how far along you are,
Not very far.
And we can't really talk specifics yet because there's a review embargo. But this book is it's a weird descriptor, I think, for this era, but this book is delightful.
Yes.
I don't want to say too much, but seeing kind of the day-to-day of these Jedi Masters, these council members, and how they interact with each other has been so unexpected. And it's a page turner in a different kind of way, because there's something fun about this book. We also know that it's on the cusp of the worst time in the history of the Jedi. It's kind of like this calm before the storm, just knowing what's coming up in the timeline afterwards. But that's where I'm at right now. This year, again, being getting review copies of books, it's just been nonstop. We got Escape from Valo and Defy the Storm right at the beginning of the year. And then it was, here, you might like this audiobook to review as well. So I'm like, okay, well, then we get that. Then we get The Living Force. And then it was, okay, I'm going to reread The Eye of Darkness because we're going to talk about that in a little bit. And then I got asked to reread Light of the Jedi for another possible show that I don't think is going to happen, but I still had fun rereading it. That was my 4th reread.
Oh, man.
And then the Bad Batch trailer came out, and it was like, oh, man, I should really reread Dark Disciple.
Ooh, yeah.
And did that, and on my shelf I have that Inkstone copy of Into the Void that I want to reread. Not to mention other books that I got, say for Christmas last year that I started that are just history books, not Star Wars related, that I've had to put down because it's a blessing, to have review copies. I don't want to say anything negative about it, but it's like, guys, you got to give me a chance to breathe here. Like I got, there's a lot of stuff going on, like I'm trying to live my life. I got to eat food every once in a while.
Yeah, it's really been like that. This entire year so far has been like, oh, I have not that I am complaining about having to read Star Wars books. I'm like, oh, I have to read another Star Wars book. Like I can't read this other book I might want to read because I have to read Defy the Storm before it comes out, which I still have not done. So it has been a lot, but it's so like I love it. It's so good. And like we got the Living Force, and like before we know it, we're gonna get Temptation of the Force, and that's what it's called, right? And then it's not going to stop, which, you know what? And now we have that new in-universe History of the Empire book coming out from DK in this summer. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, there's so much good happening in Star Wars books right now. And like, I hope that everyone is having a great time. And like, it's barely started. It's barely started. And here we go. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I mean, we're barely 3 months into the year, not even.
Yeah.
And it's just been this avalanche of quality stories.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's an embarrassment of riches. That's the only way I can say.
Yeah. I genuinely think Star Wars publishing has better stories every year. And like the stories that we get every year are so good, but like if you like go from one year to the next, like it just keeps getting better, and we keep getting all of these gems and all these great authors and all these amazing stories. And it's going to be interesting once the High Republic, quote unquote, ends next year, once they're done with, the current series of things that they're doing. But I'm so excited to find out what's going to happen after that and what the publishing schedule is going to look like, and the other authors that they bring in, and see maybe these other authors doing other Star Wars things since they don't have to do the High Republic. I mean, we also don't know if there's going to be other High Republic stories mixed in with other things down the line. We don't know how it's going to go, but it's going to be really interesting to see how things turn out. And it's just so exciting. One of many things I love about following the books and reading the books is like, just we don't know what the future is. Us mere mortals sitting here reading the books but not being able to work on them. We don't know what's happening, but that's exciting to like not know, but know that it's going to be amazing, whatever it is, because they're doing such a good job. Like all the things that we've gotten and like the things that we're going to continue to get, like we have the Mace Windu book coming later this year, and then more High Republic also coming this year. It's like just good thing after good thing. I'm excited.
Yeah, I feel like there's book announcements coming, because so far we know what's coming for the rest of the year, and on the surface it doesn't seem like a lot, but for the year we've already had, well, in the reviewer space, we have 3 books right now that have come out this year, and the fourth coming out in June with Temptation of the Force. And then after that, besides the Mace Windu book, it's like, what else are they going to do? We know there's more High Republic coming, but what are they going to do outside of that space? And I think you're right to bring up like what it's going to be like after the High Republic, because this initiative has been so dense with its storytelling. Like, there's so many books, in different reading, what's the word I'm looking for here? Like targeted audience, books, that it can be hard to keep up. It can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun, and it's really fulfilling to go through all of that. But when all of that ends, I mean, are they going to continue some of the phase 2 stories? Because there's still lots of questions that we haven't had answered yet, directly, if they don't get answered in the rest of phase 3, things like that. I want to know specifically what the heck Oppo Rancisis is doing during the High Republic. It's like, well, he's just on this planet. And it's like, okay, man, like we heard your voice in Jedi Survivor for like a brief second. It's like, yo, what are you doing? Yeah. And, again, with the insight of what we know from the Living Force, clearly he's there because he's one of the masters, but it's like, hey, what are you doing out there, man? Yeah. But yeah, I think the landscape for books is going to be a lot different after this initiative, because do they just go back to, publishing books as they did, have 4 or 5 books come out in a year, with more like the reference book type stuff, or do they start a new initiative? Do they kick off, more Old Republic stuff, or go past, you know, whatever's going to happen in the next Rey movie, do they start kicking off some of that stuff? I would imagine there's got to be something in the works for post episode 9. Now somebody's pitched a story that they're like, give us an outline, have it done by August, and then we'll take it from there, because I know that the process for writing these stories takes quite a while from their inception.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. And my hope, and you know, they could do this or they could not, is, you know, the initiative of the High Republic as we know it will end. But I hope that the High Republic becomes an era where, like, as with any other era in Star Wars, we just get books that are set in the High Republic every once in a while, like in the rotation. Like, there's a book that's set, you know, here, and then oh, we're going back to the High Republic for this book. Like, I really hope that's what it becomes. Because then it's like the High Republic is not just this one time like thing, like it made a splash and then it's done. Like I think it needs to become another era in Star Wars where publishing touches every once in a while. And like, it doesn't have to be like a bunch of books at a time, but like one, you know, every once in a while where we go back to it. And I think that would be like comforting for a lot of people and kind of fun. But then you get other things that are not that, and that's fine. I hope they don't like, I would love for, like, I know it's a lot of books and I don't want to overwork anybody, but I really hope that they don't like too much like lessen the amount of books we get a year, because like, I don't know, I've gotten so used to like there being like a book like almost every month, and I'm like, I would miss that personally.
Yeah, I'm at the point where I'm checking my mail, like, is there another book? And like, I know we just got a book. I'm like, is there another one coming? Like, you kind of get that itch.
Yeah.
You know, you get used to the frequency that these things come out. But you know, with the end of the High Republic looming, and while the quote unquote initiative might be over, there's still a gap of time between when it seems like these books might end and say the beginning of the Acolyte, you know. So there is a chance that there could just be one-off character studies, like how we got with Rise of the Red Blade, or say Brotherhood or something, that just kind of focuses on a particular person or two or event, that might help fill in some gaps. Because, you know, having people question, you know, me specifically about, you know, what do you think is going to happen with Vernestra Rowe between now and the Acolyte? And it's like, brother, your guess is as good as mine. I have no idea. There's still a good chunk of time, from where we think the books might end, that could sway her character. Like, there's things that are hinting at who she may become later on in these books, but we've only had her in one book in the High Republic. And I know as we're recording this, Defy the Storm isn't out yet, but the state of her character is so much different than it was in phase 1, and she still has a lot of growing to do. She's only 17 in phase 3. And so wherever she ends up at the end of this thing, it can't just be that's the end of the story and this is who she is until the Acolyte timeline happens. You know, she still has to change and grow and become this person. So it's really hard to speculate, but it is also exciting to like be along for the journey, knowing we're going to see her, you know, if the rumors are true, in just a couple of months on screen.
Yeah. Oh man, I forgot about that. I was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
I got it. Well, we'll see. We'll see. I don't tend to believe anything until it's officially announced, but who knows?
I'm the same. I'm the same.
I'm like, my thing is like, if it's not from StarWars.com, it's not real, but that's sometimes not the case, depending on who gets the privilege of announcing things. But official, whatever you want to consider official. I mean, I hope a lot of people don't. It's fine. You know, speculation is fun. I don't like to tell people they can't do that. We can get excited about the Acolyte, but if it doesn't happen soon, it'll happen someday.
That was the Acolyte and Andor were my two like most hyped things when they had that Disney Investor Day, and then you know all the announcements were made. And the thing with it, they just felt like they were going to be so different. And I mean, Andor shaped up to be a fantastic series. It's top of my list as far as the TV stuff goes. And the Acolyte for me, just it has the potential to be something very unique. One of the things that I talk about on my show a lot is perspectives, both from the creators and those of us who are absorbing these stories, and how they affect us on different personal levels. And knowing what we know of Leslie Headland and their experience, how that can shape a Star Wars story at the end of this time, when individuality and uniqueness is like diminishing.
Yeah.
And how you strive for that sense of self in a um, in a system that has become less democratized, it seems. So I think that perspective from Leslie is going to be pretty special, and I'm very excited for it.
Me too. And I think like, and I won't say anything bad about the Disney Plus shows that have happened so far. But I think what'll be really interesting about The Acolyte is getting us out of that era that we're in right now with all these live action shows, which is like, it has to be, you know, this many years after Return of the Jedi, and we have to lead up to, you know, hint to things that happened in the sequel trilogy. And like, that's fine. And like, they're going to keep telling stories in that era, and they're gonna do that. And there's nothing we can do about it. But this show will kind of get us, kind of like how Andor did, kind of get us out of that era into something else, into a different story in a different time, and in a time on screen that we have not had in Star Wars before. Haven't touched this really yet, and that's going to be really, really, really fun. And I have really high hopes for it. And I don't like to set my expectations too high for things, just because that just allows you to go into things and really enjoy them more. And that's just the way I like to do it with Star Wars, because I think Star Wars is meant to be enjoyed and it's fun. But I am very, very excited about The Acolyte, and I'm trying to like be like, don't get too excited, but it's hard because it's going to be really, really good.
Yeah, I've learned over the last maybe 2 years or so to kind of temper my excitement. My former co-host texted me the day before Ahsoka came out, and he was like, "Brother, what are you feeling? Like 1 to 10?" And I was like, my hype level, and this was not a statement on the show at all, but my hype level coming into it was about a 2 out of 10.
Yeah.
Only because I just wanted to see it as it happened.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I temper my excitement for a lot of things now because yeah, I don't want to disappoint myself. I don't want to build up an expectation that realistically can't be met. I just want to see it as it is and judge it afterwards.
Right.
And as it goes on, if the hype builds because the story is, you know, good or whatever, then it'll feel more earned. So that's just something that I've had to learn for myself.
Yeah, it's hard to get to that point, but I'm glad that like I have, for sure, because I was the same way with Ahsoka, where it's like I would rather go into it like just for the interest of enjoying it and seeing what it's about, and if I want to then go back after the fact and look at things, analyze things, talk about things, like I will do that. But the first time I'm seeing it, I really just want to experience it, and like being able to get out of your head and out of like having to. One thing that I've really kind of tried to mold my online experience to is like not having to react to things immediately or in the moment. And so like as much as I love reviewing these shows and things like that, what I love doing more is being able to go into it and seeing it and then allowing myself time to process it and really think it deeper about it if it's warranted. And then, you know, because it's either, for me, it's either if I don't love something, I don't tend to talk about it because I don't think there's a lot of value in certain situations in being negative about something when you don't have to be. Like we were talking about this before we started recording. Like if it's not for me, it's not for me, and I don't want to like ruin anyone else's experience is kind of where I'm at the moment with that. But also it's like if I love something, I want to dig deeper into why I love that thing. And when you're just reacting in the moment to something, like if I don't live tweet things, but if I were to do that, if we're still calling it that these days, I wouldn't be able to, I would like not make those connections as fast because I just have to immediately be like, oh, that was cool. Look at that. Instead of like, oh, like this reminds me of this other Star Wars story where this thing happened and this character thought this. That's the way I like to do it. Just because I get more, whatever makes me get more enjoyment out of the thing, which is what I'm here for in Star Wars fandom these days, is to just have fun.
Yeah, I mean, think about, for most of us, you know, if you were born of a time, and I'm going to age myself here a little bit, but speculation as a kid was, you know, how you talked with your friends at school or on a playground or you know, at a kid's party or something like that. What's going to happen in Return of the Jedi? You know, I'm old enough to remember these movies in the theater. So, and same thing with prequel kids who, yes, the internet was a thing, but I can't imagine many 9 and 10-year-olds with an AOL account, you know what I mean? Or, you know, talking on AIM in chat rooms. But so it was a lot more innocent to have speculation because you didn't have, you know, an opinion expressed and then 100 strangers tell you why you're wrong to feel a certain way. And that's where we are right now. And
Yeah.
it's one of the reasons why I like talking to my son about Star Wars. He just turned 14, and we've had the sequel trilogy and all of Rebels being new for him, and I got to experience those things not just as a fan for myself, but as a parent, and to see them through his eyes in a way, and it made it more exciting for me. And he's not online looking at laser-eyed YouTubers give their opinions on things. It's he and I will talk about stuff, and specifically, like right now we're talking about the Bad Batch, and for me, I'm kind of struggling with the show I've been. And he's old enough that he feels that he can argue with me about why I'm wrong. And I'm like, we're not arguing, we're talking about it. If you like it, tell me why. And if I don't like it, I'm going to tell you why. And not to try to quote unquote win the side, but to come to an understanding about what it is about our perspectives that makes these kinds of stories work. And on the book front, I think I think I get more excited about books as they're coming out because they're less frequent. When we get a show, we get 12 weeks of it or 8 weeks of it or whatever. So there's a block of time where everybody's kind of talking about it. And when a book announcement happens, you've got maybe a few months before the book comes out. So you can building hype around a book is different because they'll release a chapter and not a trailer. You know what I mean? They're not giving you snippets of the entire thing. They'll give you a chunk and just leave you hanging. And to me, that's become more exciting. An exciting way to take in these stories. And it's also something that you do 100% by yourself. Book reading Star Wars is a completely solitary thing, unless you're doing an audiobook and you got people in the car with you and they're like, come on, Dad, turn that stuff off because we're not into it. Which I've had happen. But the book experience is completely solitary. And to me, not that I don't like people. I mean, some people suck, but I like people, but I like to experience these things by myself, absorb it in a way that, I'm free from distraction. I can stop and reread. Like you can't really do that if you have a room full of people, you're watching a show and like, wait, what did he say? And then you have to rewind it, or it was something that was really impactful and you scroll back and there's 6 other people like, hey man, what are you doing? We're trying to watch that. The book experience is so unique. And I think this is something I talk about on my show too. It's like, there isn't a lot of the same discourse with books online because the audience is just naturally smaller. And, you'll have, your grumpy people who want to say, well, Geode is stupid. It's just a rock. That's great. Read the book. Clearly you didn't. And so for a lot of us who are fans of these things, the discourse just kind of slides off. And because we know we love it and you're not going to hamper our enjoyment of it. And I think for a lot of us too, who are really strong into books, who probably just grew up reading, you're used to having that quiet time. You're used to absorbing these things in a way that, informs your opinions about other bigger things in your life. And I'm at a place now, again, as a parent, where Star Wars is guiding me in a different way than it did growing up. And I'm glad I had it as a kid because of, things that happened in my own life. But I'm also grateful that I have it now, and especially the High Republic. Yesterday, as of recording, was the 4-year anniversary of the announcement of what the Project Luminous was going to be. And, I tweeted out that, like, I don't know where I'd be without the High Republic, because these things have given me such a unique perspective on a thing that I thought I already knew, not in the trivia sense of what Star Wars is, but I was so ingrained in the DNA of what Star Wars was. And then the High Republic came and flipped it on its head while keeping the same thematic elements that make Star Wars. And I'm grateful for it.
I really think, and we'll talk more about the High Republic in a little bit, just overall, but I think it continues to amaze me, and I think is something that will stand out to me about the High Republic even after it's over, is how many people have come to the Star Wars books because of the High Republic. Like, there were people who maybe were Star Wars fans but had never read the books, or hadn't read the books for a long time, or weren't even really readers, but they saw, like, all this hype for the High Republic, where they heard their friends talking about it and they're like, I want to try reading a Star Wars book. I want to read Light of the Jedi, or whatever book they may have started with. And they get into the High Republic and they're like, some of them have now read other Star Wars books and are discovering all these other stories. And I'm like, that is so beautiful to me that someone who really wasn't, into the books or Star Wars that much is now like, gets to have this thing that they love and enjoy and experience. And there's the community that surrounds it. And whatever reason they may have had to get into it, like the High Republic is that reason that they're here now. I think that's so cool that like books can do that for a person. And I always try to tell the authors if I ever get the chance to talk to them, I'm like, your books have changed lives. Don't ever forget that, because it's true.
Yeah, and it's got to be really weird as a creator to be on that side of it. It's like, the first time I heard somebody say the only person in the world who didn't get to enjoy Star Wars was George Lucas, because it was his creation, and for him, he was the output that we took in. And in a lot of ways, it feels like that with this initiative. The difference being that there are so many creatives now behind it that are sharing and bouncing these ideas off of each other in Zoom calls or whatever, however they do it. That it's got to be just as exciting for them to say like, oh, that is a great idea. I can't wait to see how that comes out. And it's like, oh, well, you're going to be the one writing the book. What? I don't know how the process works, but I can imagine somebody being like, oh, I get to tell that story. And it becomes more exciting and engaging for them. And it's also got to be gratifying to see those of us who are so entrenched in this thing, who have been, following it since the beginning and just carrying on the dialogue online. I can only imagine that some of them, I would hope, to just sit back and just see somebody's random thread or somebody's discussion about what it is they like about these books and just be like, man, I did that. I would hope that they would have, some sense of pride. I have pride for them if they don't for themselves.
Yes.
Because of how special the High Republic has felt. And, in time, if I do get to have some of these authors on, I will be, I don't know, like there's that weird parasocial thing about how, online fandoms work. And like, am I going to geek out if I talk to an author and be like, like the old Chris Farley show, or like, remember when you wrote about Proud in The Eye of Darkness? Yeah, that was terrible. And it's it, you know what I mean? Am I going to clam up, or am I going to have, the wherewithal to kind of, speak intelligently? Which, I mean, I don't know. People who listen to my show, if I sound intelligent on my show, let me know. If you think I'm a dummy, you can tell me that too. Just be nice about it.
I was so nervous to talk to George Mann last year because of how big of a fan I am of the stories that he told in Star Wars. And I was like I've done enough interviews just in my career in general now that like I don't get nearly as nervous as I used to, because it's like it's part of the job. You kind of just do it, and like the authors or whoever it is are there like to promote the thing, and like they're not judging you, like it's a whole thing. But I was so nervous to talk to George Mann, and he had so many, because he got my questions beforehand, and he had prepared like all of these, like not that authors are like not normally insightful, but like he had prepared all these like answers that just like went so in depth of like how the High Republic works and all these things. And I'm like, that is like, I was not expecting that. Like I thought you'd just come with like, the basic answers to my questions that didn't reveal too much. And there was this whole like, he's like reflecting on all these things, and I'm like, this is why I'm so glad that so many of us do get to talk to Star Wars authors in general, because like they genuinely, and you can tell when you talk to them, or when you're listening to someone talk to them, you can tell they genuinely love what they're doing and love to talk about it and love to share things about that. And there's so much of the High Republic and behind the scenes that we don't know. But yeah, it's like you think, yeah, I think if I ever get to talk to Kevin Scott, I will not be able to form words. I think that'll be very difficult someday.
A quick story about Kevin. So Celebration Chicago 2019, the morning of the Phantom Menace panel, that Monday, I had, a few weeks prior, I had met Michael Morrissey, who has written, some of the Star Wars Adventures comics, and he most recently did the Hyperspace Stories number 10, I think it was, with the Bad Batch. And so we had become friends, having met at a book signing a few weeks prior. And so that morning we went to the Phantom Menace panel, he and I, and we got there really early. We were talking about our families and stuff like that. And afterwards, walking back to the main show floor, Kevin happened to be walking by. And so he introduced me, and we took a picture by the big mural that they had on the concourse there at McCormick Place, and just the briefest conversation. Oh, hey, it's nice to meet you. He's incredibly tall, and I'm not, so that was that's one thing. But he was really nice to just chat with for a second. And at the time in 2019, they had just made the announcement of what the High Republic was. We were only a month removed from it, or 2 months removed from the announcement. And there was that part of me of like, hey man, what is this thing? And it was like, can't tell you, can't say nothing about it. And I'm like, oh, you have no idea how excited I am for whatever this thing is going to be. And again, just a really brief meeting. Him and Mike went off to spend their day, and I had to leave early because I had to pick up my son from school that Monday, which was a weird transition to go from like, because we were living in Chicago at the time, so it was weird to like leave the con, meet all of these wonderful people in the fan space that I'd only known online, and leave and go do like normal dad thing. Like, so like the come down from that high of that weekend was immediate, because I had to sit in a parking lot and then go like to my son's school, which was great. He was, smaller at the time. So it was, it's always a good experience, but it was like, man, I just left thousands of my new friends in this convention center, and and I have to immediately go back into regular life. There was no travel home, there was no I have to pack, there was no transition back into it. It was just right back into it. So yeah, Kevin's great, and I'd love to have him come on the show too. I remember just telling him on Twitter, like, when do you sleep, man? Like, you're writing everything all the time. When do you rest?
Oh yeah, I know. Was that the year, or was that Monday the day that it snowed? It was like April and it snowed a lot in Chicago. Was that year?
Yeah, it was the Sunday. It was during the Mandalorian panel that morning. It snowed.
All right, yeah. Okay, I was there. I was there. It's funny to think like, we're talking all these years later and we were both at a thing but didn't know each other then. Yeah.
I've got pictures from Celebration Chicago. Oh, I'll give you a really good for instance. So the Black Series Rebels, when they were doing their show, they would do their pin drops and stuff like that. And they had a big meetup because they had a shirt that they call Luminous Beings, and it was George Lucas with Puppet Yoda from around the time of Empire Strikes Back. And they had this meetup and everybody wore the shirts, and they, on their website, there's a GIF of everybody when they took the picture. And to just scroll through everybody that's there, like, there I am, I'm right in front, and there's, Lacey from the Resistance broadcast, and there's, Jerry from Bombad Cast, and Scotty's there, and Brandon Winerdy is 2 people over from me, and Alden Diaz was in that group, and like, none of us knew each other, but we were all part of this group, and we've all come to become friends. I took a picture with Alex and Molly from Star Wars Explained with my son, and in the background there's Jerry from Bombad Cast just like looking at his phone, and Adam Lance Garcia is doing an interview with somebody, all in the same picture.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, it's the most bizarre thing to like, for a time we were just strangers walking through this convention floor, and now we're randomly texting each other our excited thoughts about whatever it is that we just experienced, and we've become friends in this weird, it's a really, really weird way to navigate fandom growing up, especially in a time when there wasn't a community for Star Wars in the same way. It was just what you and your friends talked about, and in a way it still is that, but it's a lot different, it's a lot bigger, and I've said this a lot too. There are people that I consider friends now because of Star Wars that I may never physically interact with because they live in a part of the world that I may never get to, or they may never come here, but they're still just as much a friend because we've had conversations beyond Star Wars about our personal lives, about our experiences, something that may be happening, somebody will say randomly, a family member died, and you send condolences, that's bridging a gap that's bigger than just what the fandom is. And you come to really, know and care about these people that, again, you may not interact with as much, but we're all normal people that have normal lives, and Star Wars is just a thing that brought us together.
That's one of my favorite things about being a Star Wars fan, is like seeing how it brings people together. And like, I know so many people in my real life now that I may not have ever. I am married to someone who I met on Star Wars Twitter. These weird things happen because, you interact with people who have similar interests to you, and then you like get to know these people outside of that, and you find out that they're real people and whatever. But it starts with a common interest sometimes. It's wild, and I love it. Yeah, we already started talking about the High Republic a little bit, so let's continue doing that. This is great. I'm having so much fun. I just wanted to say that because sometimes people get nervous when we're like talking a lot, not about the thing that we came to talk about, but I'm like, I love it. It's great.
I'm having a good time too. I'm glad that you invited me to come on. This is great. We're not even done yet, and I'm like,
no,
oh, this is
we're
just
not.
what a wonderful time.
It's so fun. Star Wars fans doing fun podcasting stuff. I always joke that like you're not a real Star Wars fan unless you've tried to have a Star Wars podcast. That's not really how I feel, but like to be like obsessed enough with the galaxy far, far away to like want to talk about it with other people like on a microphone and like record it to be like archived on the internet maybe forever. We'll see.
Maybe, yeah.
We'll see. I don't have any faith that that's true anymore. It's fine. But yeah, so let's talk about the High Republic. Just briefly, I would love because I love to hear people's like thoughts on like how it has evolved over time. And like we're in the third phase of it. And like I will say, I haven't gotten a chance to talk about this a lot yet because we haven't talked about phase 3 too much on the show yet, which is part of the reason why we're here. But I think phase 3 is my favorite so far. And I think it's the phase for me that I've been like as heavily invested in the characters and where the story is going, more so than in past phases. Like the past 2 phases have been good, but I think if I were to compare like how I felt at the beginning of phase 1 compared to how I felt at the start of phase 3, I read The Eye of Darkness, which is, believe it or not, the book we're here to talk about today, and I was like, I couldn't stop reading it. I was like, I need to know what is going on with these characters. And like I think part of that really was in phase 2 being away from this time period specifically and away from these characters that we'd gotten to know in phase 1, and then seeing all the things that happened in phase 2 in the past and how it relates back to where we were going in phase 3, and then coming back and picking up essentially where we left off. That was like magical to me. And I think phase 3, I finally gotten to the point where I'm like, now I want to go back and reread everything from phase 1. Not that I wish I would have had time to do that before phase 3. I did not. But anyway, we're still here. And I'm like, I think the things that they have learned in the process of making these books as they've done it is fascinating to me. Like they especially with like the release schedule and being like, maybe we shouldn't release all 3 books like right one after the other. Maybe we should spread it out a little bit. And I think so far that's working pretty well. I love it though. I remember the excitement of the High Republic first coming out because it was supposed to come out earlier and they had to delay it and it was a whole thing. But finally I remember it was either Light of the Jedi or High Republic was trending on Twitter back when that mattered. And that was cool. I was like, a Star Wars book is trending. Like that many people are talking about it. But now like to be all these years later and to, as you mentioned, having just celebrated the anniversary of the first announcement, I'm like, I can't believe it's been this long and it feels like it's been no time at all.
Yeah, it's crazy because with the delay and the lead up, I misspoke a little bit when I met Kevin. That was when they just announced the Project Luminous. It wasn't even the High Republic yet. We didn't get that till 2020. So thinking about where we were at the time and like, what is this initiative? What does this mean? Project Luminous.
Yeah.
And then now in hindsight, knowing, to some extent what that means as, for Light and Life has become a hashtag, and what it is that the Jedi are fighting for in this era. It's the evolution of these stories has been so gratifying, as painful as some of them have been. I'm looking at you, Kevin. Kevin's done some things with with Star Wars books, but and that's just a sign of good storytelling to show, to feel or hurt. I'm not putting anything on Kevin. He's been through enough with how fandom reacts to some things, but the evolution of these stories, thinking back to when they had that whiteboard, and it was like dinosaurs and just these wild ideas. And I'd have to go back and try to find a picture of that again and see if they've checked everything off and that we've moved beyond that and now it's something else in these stories. But where phase 3 is right now, and again, having read everything, including Defy the Storm, and having that little bit of insight, this kickoff collectively feels very parallel to Phase 1 to me. But in a different way, where the Phase 1 kickoff was like, okay, here's this, the first book comes out and it's a countdown for the first couple of chapters with the great disaster happening in Light of the Jedi. And, that the story continues as it does. And I'm trying to remember the books. It was a mission. No. Out of the Dark. No, I'm trying to remember. It was Claudia Gray's book and Justina's book that came out as part of that first wave.
A Test of Courage.
Test of Courage. Thank you.
And Into the Dark.
Into the Dark. There you go, man. You can edit all that out and make me sound real smart. No, don't. Let people know how scrambled brained I am. But I read the Test of Courage and Into the Dark before I read Light of the Jedi, because I had review copies of those two books. And it was weird to kind of go back knowing that something terrible had happened, but not knowing all the details of it with Light of the Jedi. But having come to really love these characters in a way that makes them feel almost more tangible, because we don't have a lot of visual representation of what they look like. We get to imagine them for ourselves, who they are, what they sound like, if we don't do audiobooks or whatever. That when Phase 1 ended with Midnight Horizon and Yoda coming in with this masked or cowled, person who we now know who it is because of the Eye of Darkness, was like, how long do I have to wait to pick up this story? And then Phase 2 kicks off, and it was like this completely different thing, which, in hindsight, I remember thinking when it started, like, do I need to read these before Phase 3? Because it's farther back in the past. What are these connections going to look like? And stupid me, not realizing just how smart these creators are, and forming these connections between Phase 2 and 3, even though there's this big gap in time. So when Phase 3 started, I was the same way. I mean, I think I blew through the Eye of Darkness over a weekend when I got the copy, and promptly reread it within like a couple of weeks. And I knowing that we were going to do this, I did another reread of it. And there are some things in this book specifically that are like so emotionally like charged, because we know both the histories of Phase 1 and Phase 2, because of the connections that they're putting in these things. And George Mann, as a storyteller, I'm the same way. I've loved everything that he's read or written so far, but this book took me by surprise by the time I got to the end of it, because there's a lot of doom and gloom in this theme, and that the Jedi are, at one of their lowest points in their history. But there are these sprinklings of hope in this book, in people's mannerisms, in people's interactions, that is just these little slight reminders that it's going to be okay. And again, being old enough, when I did my review, this book to me felt very much like the weeks after 9/11 in America. And where do we go from here? What do we do? There were so many why questions. There was so much uncertainty about how do we carry on? When can I go back to work? How do you make sense of all of that? And that's the Jedi are trying to scramble for an understanding that they can't seem to grasp yet. For them, they have a logic outside of emotion, and everything is so emotionally charged because of this loss, that they have to kind of skirt both lines without totally losing their way. And I think George Mann did something really special with this book in that regard.
Yeah, he really did. And like, I think you can't have Star Wars without hope. And of course, there are going to be stories that are, that feel very not hopeful, and then things happen, and they're not all good. But I think to have, as you said, the little bits in this book that remind you that like it's going to turn out all right eventually, even if it's not okay right now. Like, that is such an important thing to have. And the seamless way that he did it in The Eye of Darkness continues to impress me. It's been a minute since I read the book. I think I read it twice. I think I read it when we first got the review copy, and then when we got the audiobook, I think I listened to it again before it came out. But it's just so good. And we're going to talk more about that. There is, I think, the one thing that I wish had not been the case, and there's nothing that can be done about this, but because we got the review copy so early, I think I either started the book or ended up reading the entire thing around the same time that Shadows of Starlight started coming out. And I'm like, I wish that at least for the first few issues of those, I would have read those before the book. And it ends up being fine. Like these books are designed, these stories are designed so like if you read one before the other, like you're gonna catch up and figure out what's happening, and they give you enough exposition where you get it. But I was like, oh, like especially reading the first issue of Shadows of Starlight, I'm like, I would have loved to you know, have known all of this. But like again, they give you enough context in the book itself. It's fine, but like, but it was like, I also think stories in Star Wars work very well when they're told out of order. So like reading them out of order, even if unintentionally, like I did enjoy. Not having all of the context, having not read Shadows of Starlight, and then going back after I started the book and being like, oh, like that's how they got separated. That's why they're trying to come back together. Here's all the things that happened. Yeah, it's a really good comic series. It's tragically short. I wish there had been more issues, but highly recommend reading those if you have not. Like, even if you're not, not everyone's into comics, that's fine. But I think it gives you a lot of context for the beginning of this book and where everyone is, because it's set in the year leading up to. So there's like year gap between the end of phase 1, start of phase 3. And it's set like in that in between time, and you kind of figure out like where all these characters are at emotionally, and then why they disperse, they go certain ways, or why certain things happen. Yeah, that was the only thing I'm like, oh, like I almost got this book too early, but it's fine. I'm not complaining.
Having done a recent reread of The Eye of Darkness, those 4 issues they're almost, I want to say, except for the Martian Row issue, the 4th one, the 3 previous issues are summarized in the novel. And I kind of forgot about it.
Yeah.
Because I was rereading it and I was like, oh, because I was like, well, how did Pratraveeder when did that happen? When was he kidnapped by the Nile?
Yeah.
And doing the reread, I'm like, oh, there it is right there. It's in chapter blah, blah, whatever. I don't even remember which one it was in, but it's like they plainly state they were on a mission and he gets kidnapped.
Yeah.
Or I have some highlighted passages, and one of them is about the initiation of the Guardian protocols. And I'm like, oh, that whole comic issue is basically summarized in a paragraph.
Yeah.
It's like it's all in there. And I think with our excitement, we tend to read these things so quickly. And I'm glad I was highlighting things.
Yeah.
Not in a physical book. We had digital copies that I was able to highlight on my Kindle, because I will never write in a book. I think that's disrespectful. But and kudos to you if you do. That's on you. But it was still like, oh, it's all there. And in my excitement, I just kind of forgot about those details because I was looking at more the bigger picture of what the story is. But that comic series is definitely worth a read if anybody hasn't read it yet.
Yeah. It just gives you like they tell you what happens, and like I'm glad that they do that, because there is like with an initiative like this where you're doing things across different storytelling mediums, like you can't expect everyone to read everything, and so you have to do that very quick summary. But they do, first of all, they do such a good job of it that it is very easy to like you get it if you kind of like are reading it and you're reading it quickly, and like, but if you want, you have the option to then go back and read the comic if you haven't yet and be like, oh, like here's the expanded version of how that happens and why that happens. I think it's cool. But I do appreciate that like they also understand in doing these things that like not everyone's going to read the comic. Not everyone wants to, not everyone, for whatever reason, not everyone's going to get to it. And to have that in the book, and for the most part throughout the High Republic, to not have to say like, go read this if you want to understand this. There was, what comic was it where they were like, do you want the, oh yeah, it was, no, which comic was it? Where they had to be like, oh, if you want this full story, you have to go read Tales of Light and Life, which is fine. But it really stood out to me as like, wow, like you're very clearly saying like, we're not going to tell you what happens. You have to go read it. That is a very good story in that book, by the way, if you want to figure out how Buryago was rescued from the aftermath of Starlight Beacon. But
yeah, that story almost made me cry. I was real close to crying. I don't cry often with books, but that one was like, damn it, Charles, why you gotta do that to my heart, man?
Yeah. I mean, mean, that's what they do, though. That's what these authors have become known for in the High Republic community, is hurting us over and over and over again. But like you said, it's good. I think I agree that it's a sign of a very good story when it makes you feel things, even if those things are not always pleasant. Because if a story's not making you feel anything, then it's not doing its intended job. But if you're sitting there almost crying, that's not a bad thing. Like, sometimes things hurt, and that's why we have stories to like put us through those emotions, and that's what it's supposed to be like. That I don't like it when people are like, oh, this story made me cry, I don't like it. I'm like, but the point was that it made you cry,
to make you feel something,
and to
it's
make
art.
you feel
You're supposed
something.
to feel something from it, right?
Exactly. That is why art is so important. Let us just take a moment to appreciate art. Art overall, all of it. It's great. Yeah, so let's comment. Okay, we're so far in. Let's talk about, again, that's fine. Let's talk about The Eye of Darkness by George Mann. First adult novel in the High Republic. He's done lots of other things in the High Republic. An audio drama, all kinds of stuff. But here we are, George Mann writing this book. So much happens in this book, but I think it's so well put together. And I think the stakes for this book were really so high because it is the book that really is going to bring most people back into the High Republic after phase 2. And they really took that and said, we're going to do the best job possible. And they did that, and then some. And again, you have a lot of familiar characters that we've met before if you read phase 1 and you remember them and you're like, I can't wait to see where they're at now. And they're obviously in different places now because it's been a year. They've been through a lot. And I think going into this book, I was most looking forward to kind of figuring out, like, because at the end of phase 1, we get the sense that like the NTIL are really going to do a lot of damage here. They've gotten to a point where they're going to try to overtake as much of the galaxy as possible and do whatever Marchion Ro wants to do. But I was really looking forward to seeing like how far have they gotten? What have they done? How is everyone kind of dealing with that? And really you start with, oh, here's this storm wall where they've literally blocked people from getting in and out and having these communications. I'm like, that's just terrible. How dare they?
Yeah, I mean, and thematically, I remember thinking this with phase 2 about how communication is very much its own character in the High Republic, to literally separate people and break bonds, by putting up this storm wall, was very like thematically on the nose for me. Because it severs the idea of stronger together.
Yes.
By fracturing peoples. I think it was a really smart move that they had been planting the seeds for, pun intended, in all the way back to Out of the Shadows, with the stuff with I think Chancey Yaro's scientific exploits and all of that stuff, which R.I.P. Chancey. She didn't deserve what she got in NTIL. Spoilers for the end of phase 1 if you haven't read any of this stuff. But, what are you doing here if you didn't read those books? I mean, come on.
Oh, by the way, this is a spoiler discussion. If anyone was wondering. Oh, yeah. Yes, we may spoil some things. I like to keep my discussions like fairly like broad, but we still may also spoil things. So if I forgot to say that at the beginning, but if you're wary of that, beware, here we are. I'll also put it in the title of the episode, but it's fine anyway.
But yeah, it was that like erecting of the storm wall, for lack of a better term, and then the subsequent expansion of it in this book is heartbreaking to know that, what they do for weaponization against the Jedi and the Republic is so on the nose, but in the best way. It strikes at the heart of what the Jedi and the Republic represent. And they're like, no, we are not all the Republic, because my wall says we're not. We are, this is NTIL space and that is your space, and leave us alone. And if you threaten us, we will do terrible things to you, and broadcast it for the entire galaxy to see, which that chapter destroyed me. With Pratravita's death, getting it through the eyes of the journalist whose name I'm forgetting. And that was one of the excerpt chapters that they released ahead of the book's release. And I was like, whoa, guys, spoilers. If you want to read this chapter, like, go ahead and do so, but be prepared. Like, it's heavy. And experiencing that in the book, and then subsequently the audiobook is they do some terrible things in the audiobook that are great in their way. But yet to experience that through the eyes of somebody who is not of the Force in the same way, just having kind of like a quote unquote regular person be our lens for that, made it that much more gut wrenching. Because they are completely helpless in that situation, more so than somebody who has superpowers, as the Jedi would have.
Yeah, that was a really good way to do it. And like I that was definitely something I had to pause and really think about in the moment when I was reading it, because I'm like, oh, of all the ways you could have tried to make this seem even more terrible than it already was, you have the element of it's from someone else's eyes, but then you also just have the fact that it's a terrible thing that's happening, and really to show that like the Nile will stop at nothing to claim their territory and keep it. And this book is so good at like making the Nile like so much worse than they already were. I think it was really important for them to do that, because really, like, how can you up the stakes of something at this point in an overarching story? Well, you just make the Nile like 10 times worse than they were with the last time you saw them. Immediately, almost. Immediately, you're like thrown into this moment where this terrible thing is happening. Like right after everyone in the Republic was like, oh, like nothing bad is gonna happen on this day. It's gonna be fine. Like, it's the anniversary, but everyone's gonna be all right. And it absolutely was not. I mean, oh, how dare they? Really.
It speaks to what the core of this whole initiative is about fear versus hope on a galactic scale, where, I mean, Marchand at the end of this thing says, you are all the Republic, but we are the Nile. Underestimate us at your peril. It's like, you want to come try knocking on this door? Watch out for booby traps, because we're going to get you. And there's this unknown about Marchand with a lot of his intentions. We know at the end of phase 1, and then with the, I think it's the Eye of the Nile, like the 2-issue comic books that came out. Kind of like what happened with his people and how they're a very mistrusting culture and all of that kind of stuff. But which I'm not a huge fan of, like monolith cultures in Star Wars, but you get what you get. But you get these moments of introspection for him in the eyes of other people. He has this dynamic with Garastaros in this book where she's trying to speak logically to an illogical person, and try to say, like, you can't just take without providing for these people. You have to have some kind of infrastructure, because eventually you're going to take everything there is, and then there's just going to be nothing left. And trying to speak logic to him to be a slightly more compassionate ruler than just this, fist on the table dictator. And the narration of his voice as this John Malkovich type sounding character makes it that much more chilling, because he's not just, the spoken Dr. Hemlock. There's something else to the way he's presented, especially in the audiobooks, that to me, it's just more menacing, because he's not afraid to do these terrible things, where for the most part, it's, like we saw in the Shadow Starlight comics, the Nile party for like a whole year. There's a page in that where it's just a party and him sitting on his throne, just watching as like the party kind of diminishes a little bit, but they're still doing it. And it's almost like it's not enough for him that his people are celebrating while he's just kind of like, I've done the thing. But it can't just be his ultimate goal to say that I conquered this amount of space. I think there's something more personal to his connection with the Jedi that we haven't really gotten all the pieces of yet. Because that kind of vendetta just doesn't spring from nowhere. You know what I mean? Like, we get his motivations in Light of the Jedi to an extent, but the fact that Light of the Jedi starts with the attack as opposed to meet the villain and here's this little quick vignette of who they are, it just throws you right into it. I don't think you meet Marchand Rowe until almost halfway through Light of the Jedi as a villain. We just know that something terrible happened. It could be this Nile group of marauders, and they've learned some truths. But yeah, this book, especially when you get into kind of like the personal politics between him and Gira, and then branching it out to her relationship to politics with the Republic and what it is that she's trying to do. It was very interesting. And her motivations are just as suspect, because she didn't need to be there. She was a senator in the Republic, and why would she side with him? It's not confusing by any stretch, but it's just like, what is her end game as much as what is his?
Right. I think he's such a more interesting villain in the fact that there's so much we don't know about him, and we don't really get inside his head that much. A lot of when you interact with his character in the books, it's through someone else observing him or speaking to him or in the same room as him, and that makes it so much more terrifying because there is that element of like the unknown of like, what is he really thinking, what is he really planning. We get some of it, but I mean, also, if we were to get inside his head, that would be terrifying. Maybe too much so. But yeah, I think it's really interesting that like there isn't this moment like where we like you mentioned the comic, we get some backstory in him, but there's not this whole element of like we have to know everything about him and all of his motivations and why he's doing everything that he does every step of the way. Like there's so much that we don't know. And then we're right there with the Jedi, for example, who there's a lot they don't know also. And it's like you lose that element of, we know some things, but we don't necessarily always know more than they know. And that makes it fun as reading a story, because then you're like, what am I going to learn? You don't know. I love it.
Yeah, it makes the stories less predictable.
Yeah.
When you're kind of learning it with them, you don't have a Thrawn character who gives you exposition as to, and I'm not trying to denigrate Thrawn in any way. I love his books, but it's like he's telling you exactly what's happening or what's going to happen to an extent. And with these books, to present a mystery where it never feels like tiresome, to be like, oh, can we just find out what is going on?
Yeah.
They have found a way over, I don't know how many books it's been total, 20 something, I don't know, to keep the intrigue level interesting enough to keep us coming back, because outside of just the greater mysteries, the personal stories that we get in these books, say with Bell and Loden and their relationship, and Vernestra, and those stories, and the trio of Stellan, Avar, and Elzar, make us care about these stories that much more, because it reduces it down to a personal level, and it makes the stakes more relatable for those of us as readers. And because their situations are so unique to them that it's almost like there's a tragedy for everybody kind of thing. It's like you get a tragedy and you get a tragedy, and like real people can put their perspectives and say, well, I understand loss, I understand hurt, I had a mentor, I had a student, whatever the case is. That it's a weird way to find a bond between the reader and the creator of these stories, to say like, here's this terrible thing that happened, I hope you can relate. But I mean, I know that's not the motivation, but it's a weird way to present a connection, because there isn't much good happening in the beginning of this phase, and any victories that they have are so small relative to the big picture that they feel like huge victories. Namely, say like the end of this book that ends with a hand touch, a hand brush, and it's just like, it's one of those things where I can see it in like an anime screen where they brush hands, Elzar and Avar, and it's just like big light flash and like over the top kind of reaction behind it, but it's just this real subtle thing that maybe nobody else notices, but for them it's the most momentous reconnection that they've both been longing for, because it presents the idea that they're stronger together. Which is something that's explicitly said in these books about who Avar and Elzar are. Because of their growth with Stellan, they were literally stronger as a unit, as Jedi. And yes, there could be the romantic slant to it, which, nods to the cover of Temptation of the Force, coming out in June. There could be a romantic slant to it, but their connection is bigger than that, because it is explicitly said in Light of the Jedi that they are literally stronger together. Everything about Avar is her connection to the Song of the Force makes her stronger when other Jedi are around. And I don't mean strong as in like video game strength, but her connection to life gives her a stronger connection to the Force. And with Elzar's slipping and touching the dark in the ways that he has, it weakens that bond, where truths about him are coming out in these books that people are learning, that he's not the same. He never would have been the poster child that Stellan was after rescuing Lena So in the Rising Storm, which might have been to his detriment, because maybe he wanted some of that, but he's still striving for that connection throughout the course of this book, where he's like, why did Avar leave? She tells him flat out in the Shadows of Starlight book, why she's going, but it still doesn't make sense for him. And then there's no communication. Nobody's talking to each other because of the storm wall, kind of breaks everything off. So to have that tiny little reconnection at the end of this book just felt like the biggest thing possible for these characters.
I love the ending of this book. And like I'm someone who struggles with endings of books sometimes, especially when it comes to Star Wars, because I don't part of it is I just don't like when things are over that I like. But it's not as often where like I get to the ending of a book and I'm like, that was, I feel good. I feel like I'm ready for the next thing if it's a series. But this, I was like, I cannot wait to see what happens next. There's books in between the next book that we're getting, that's the adult novel, but Temptation of the Force is the next one that we're getting, and we can't say much about it because we haven't read it yet, because we don't even have review copies of it yet. But I am curious if you have any thoughts, any things you're hoping to learn more about. I mean, again, there's not much we can say because we don't know anything other than the little we've gotten with the book announcement and release date and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about the synopsis that they gave us, which was almost a chapter, it was really long.
Yeah, it was.
Knowing that Elzar and Avar are going to be front and center in this book, to me, is very exciting. And partly because of that hand touch that happens at the end of the Eye of Darkness. But you look at that, and then you look at the title of the book, The Temptation of the Force. What is tempting about the light, and how can that be detrimental?
Yeah.
How, having kind of a closed-minded motivation to just light. I don't know how they're going to frame it in the book. Whatever Tessa does in the book, I'm sure it's going to be great. But what does the temptation of the light mean in terms of these characters? Because not all of them are in the brightest spots. And knowing that, Bell and Burry and Vernestra especially are going to be in this book, what does it mean for them and their motivations? Again, the title is very intriguing, more than some of the other titles that we've gotten recently. So I don't know what we're going to get out of it. Maybe it'll be a kissing book. I just watched The Princess Bride a few weeks ago, so that's what I'm thinking. Who knows? But whatever it is, as the second adult book, man, I don't know. I would hate to think that there's something more terrible than what happens to Pradra Vider is going to happen in this book. I mean, I have questions about Porter Wrangle and what happens to him at the end of Eye of Darkness, because it's a little bit ambiguous. He has this grand fight with General Vice, or Vice, however you want to say it, who we met in one of the Phase 2 comics in The Blade. And there's a little bit of the no body, no death for Porter. They have this big fight as the ship is breaking apart. So if Porter survives, I mean, he's one of my favorite Jedi in this era. because of the stuff that he did in phase 1 with like the Steelies in Light of the Jedi, and essentially like surfing one of the vectors in, I think it's the Rising Storm. Like, dude is just gnarly, and he can cook. So I'm like, I want to know if there's more for Porter, or if he died. I don't know. Some kind of closure there would be good, but it's hard to say. And I don't remember the titles of the books that are coming out afterwards, and whether or not they'll have any kind of hints as to what to expect. But all I know is that at this point, I'm along for the ride. They got their hooks in me a long time ago.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what Tessa does with an adult novel. A book is a book, and like, but just seeing how the writing is from this perspective of these specific characters, and we haven't seen Tessa write too many solo stories in Star Wars so far. Like, oftentimes it's a pairing, which is also great, and I want to know how that works. I keep trying to get a pair of authors on so I can be like, how do you like co-write this thing that's like feels like it's by one person but it's not? Because like Escape from Fallow, for example, like that teamwork in making that thing happen is amazing. I can't get over it. But really excited to see what Tessa does with this novel, and just really looking forward to just seeing where the characters go next. That's where I'm at in the High Republic right now. I'm like, I just want to know how it ends. Not that I want it to end. I want 2025 to never come, but
yeah. This mentioning the Escape from Vallow,
mm-hmm.
the pairing of DJ Older and Alyssa Wong works so well because they are both literary chaos agents.
Yes.
And it works so well for that book because it's a little bit frenetic, it's fast-paced, it's got its humor, but it also never shied away from the danger, into thinking that the target audience is not beneath the understanding of what's going on in these stories. Which I talked about in that review. I'm plugging my own show on your show, so I
mean that's why you're here.
Right, that's exactly why I'm here. But yeah, no, it's this whole initiative, like, I'm just going to keep saying it, has been something so special for Star Wars. And again, I think it's been to its benefit so far to have it away from the screen. And I would hope that the Acolyte, if it has strong enough connections to these books, outside of just having Vernestra as a character in the show, I would hope that it drives more people to these books, because I think these books need to be read by more people because of what they have to say thematically about connections and about hope and about loss and coping, and how it can shape us, and after some kind of trauma collectively. And I think, again, I mentioned this before, for those of us of a certain age, when something tragic happens to a collective, how do we cope, as a group, as opposed to just how it affects us on the individual level. It's fascinating writing, all the way around.
Yeah, really is. And I'm looking forward to more. And I am so glad that we got the opportunity to talk about this book. I'm so behind on like my book discussions. Like when I started the show, I was like, okay, 30 days after the book comes out, book discussion. Didn't happen. Has never happened. I've never been on time. But I'm so glad that, the thing about books is that they never go away and that we can talk about them whenever. And you can always reread a book whenever. I always tell people, I'm like, don't worry about not being caught up, because like there will always be someone who will be willing to yell about a book that they love with you as soon as you're done reading it. That's how the Star Wars book community is. There's always somebody. But I'm so glad that we got to do this. I've been looking forward to discussing this book for so long because it's just so good, and it's such a good start to phase 3 if we're talking about just like the books themselves, to really kick that off, and very strong. And it's only going to get better from here. That's just, there's no denying that that's what's going to happen, based on what we've read so far since then and what we're going to read. Again, you mentioned your show. Why don't you plug all your stuff? Why don't you tell everyone, if you want to be found on the internet, where can they find you? Where can they find your stuff? What do you do? Why are you here?
Well, I am here to talk about books and other Star Wars related things. But I do have my own show. It is called Jammed Transmissions. I did not start it, and I did not come up with that name. It is a very difficult name to say fast. So thank you, Pete, for naming the show, which you did a long time ago. Pete's my brother. I love him. But so yeah, Jammed Transmissions. I put out shows whenever the hell I find time to do them because, as a parent and somebody who has the job that I have, it can be difficult to schedule time. But we have the website, jammedtransmissions.com, where you can find links for all the social medias for myself and for the show, where I'm primarily on Twitter, X, and Blue Sky right now. At Cad Bane's Bounty is me, and at JT Comlink on Twitter, and on Blue Sky it is at jammedtransmissions.com. But there's links for things like our TeePublic, lots of links to other friends' shows if you're looking to expand your Star Wars podcast horizons. And Meg, thank you so much for inviting me on to talk about this book. We've been trying to get this to happen for a little while now, and life happens.
Yes.
But I'm glad we were able to get the time together and do this.
Yeah, me too. I will definitely have to have you on again to talk about more books. We'll figure out which one and when, and we'll do it again because this has been so fun. So thank you again, and thank you all for listening. Yeah, we'll be back soon with another episode. What's coming next? I don't remember.
Defy the Storm.
Yes. Now This Is Lit is part of the Faraway Fandom Network. It is produced by Devor Mondum and written, hosted, and edited by me. Jose Jimenez designed our podcast art. You can keep up with the show on our Substack, on Now This Is Lit, and find the show wherever you get your podcasts. All the ways you can support the show are linked in the show description, but the newest way is to give us $1 a month for our Patreon. You get access to an exclusive monthly show, you get a sticker, and hopefully so many more things to come very soon. Your support, as always, means the world. Or the universe. This is Star Wars after all. For more book reviews and Star Wars Book Celebration, follow Star Wars Book Reviews on Instagram and TikTok.